Segment 4, pages 50 through 58. The cerebral ventricles. A series of chambers making up the ventricle system. They're filled with cerebrospinal fluid, or CSF. They have at least two functions: act as a shock absorber for the brain, and they provide a medium of exchange for materials such as nutrients between blood vessels and brain tissue. Each hemisphere contains a lateral ventricle. They extend into all four lobes. They're lined with a specialized membrane called the choroid plexus. They produce CSF by filtering blood. CSF flows from the lateral ventricles to the third ventricle, located in the midline. Then it continues down narrow passages into the fourth ventricle, which is located between the cerebellum and the pons. Just below the cerebellum, three small openings allow CSF to exit the ventricular system and circulate over the outer surface of the brain and spinal cord. CSF is then absorbed back into the circulatory system through large veins beneath the top of the skull. The brain has an elaborate vascular system. The brain is 2% of the body's mass, yet it is responsible for 20% of the body's energy consumption at rest. The carotid arteries ascend the left and right sides of the neck and branch out into the internal and external parts, and are responsible for bringing blood to the brain. The internal artery enters the skull and branches into anterior and middle cerebral arteries. These arteries supply blood to 2/3 of the cerebral hemispheres. The other third is supplied by the posterior cerebral arteries. Blood supply for the posterior cerebral arteries travels alongside the spinal column through the vertebral arteries, which then fuse into the basilar artery, which leads into the posterior arteries. The basilar artery also branches into the hindbrain. Major cerebral arteries join at the base of the brain to form the circle of Willis, which provides an alternate route for blood should any main arteries sustain damage. A stroke is damage of brain tissue resulting from blockage or rupture of vessels leading to the area. The 5 most common warning signs are sudden numbness or weakness, altered vision, dizziness, severe headache, confusion, difficulty speaking, and so on. Blood-brain barrier is an evolution in the brain making capillaries resistant to passage of large molecules, protecting from infections but also making delivery of drugs into the brain more difficult. Scientists can bypass this barrier, though, by using the brain's own lymphatic system, which was discovered recently. Brain imaging techniques reveal the structure and function of the living human brain. Angiography made X-rays more effective in brain mapping through the injection of radiopig into the blood vessels. Measurements of density can be used to map the brain. Computerized axial tomography, or CAT, involves X-ray source being moved around the subject's head, creating images of brain densities from different angles, which can be mathematically combined in an anatomical map. It's useful for visualizing strokes, tumors, and cortical atrophy. Magnetic resonance imaging involves a higher resolution, but uses less harmful radio frequency energy. There are 3 main steps to the process. First, the brain is centered between strong circular magnets, causing all protons within the brain tissue to line up in parallel. The protons are then knocked about by strong pulses of radio waves. When the pulse stops, protons return to original position, emitting radio waves as they go, which are then picked up by the revolving detectors to create detailed cross-sections. Diffusion tensor imaging, or DTI, is a modified form of MRI that detects diffusion of water in confined spaces to produce images of axonal fiber tracts. This behavior exhibited by water is called fractional anisotropy. DTI tractography is the use of DTIs to produce structural models of axonal fibers. Functional imaging techniques map regional brain activity during behaviors. Positron emission tomography, or PET, involves injections of short-lived radioactive chemicals which can be detected as they flow through the bloodstream to see where they flow the most, while a subject performs a particular task. Then there's the functional MRI, which is also known as the fMRI. It's the highest quality, but the slower response. Measuring small charges in brain metabolism through the use of MRI technology, particularly for the moment-to-moment use of oxygen in the most active part of the brain. Through the use of light, there's optical imaging, which uses the passage of infrared light to map brain activity. It's an inexpensive alternative to all the others. Then there's transcranial magnetic stimulation, TMS. Its strong focal magnetic currents are used to briefly stimulate cortex of alert participant. Enables experimenters to target specific areas of the cortex through electromagnetic induction. Magnetoencephalography, or MEG, like the movie that just came out, involves active circuits in the brain which produce their own minuscule magnetic fields, which can be detected through superconducting quantum interface devices, or SQUIDs. Using many SQUIDs, one can create real-time maps of cortical activity during cognitive processing. After all this, knowing that sophisticated imaging techniques require cautious interpretation, methods of detecting and observing lesions or regions of damage in the brain have evolved to become more effective and non-invasive. Between functional brain imaging, different technologies have improved speed for detecting dynamic brain activity at the cost of sharp resolution, while others experience vice versa. Computer algorithms play a big role in creating images of brain activity.